So thank you all for coming. We are going to hear Chris Burnett speak today on Reading the Sky, the visual literacy of Constellations and Planetaria. Did I do that right? Okay, great. So we're thrilled that you're all here at the IVLA conference. And I do have a few housekeeping items to announce. So this session will run an hour and 10 minutes. We'll try to build in some time for questions and answers at the end of his speech. Please help yourself to the refreshments. As you've seen, there's coffee and water on your tables. In the event of a fire alarm, we do want to note that you would want to pay attention to our room monitor. Terry, can you raise your hand? This is Terry. She's our room monitor. She will have the instructions as to where to go. The nearest bathrooms are right down the hallway here. Take the door out, go to the right, and then to the left. And then please finally remember at this time you should mute your cell phones if you have not already done so. So thank you for your participation in the conference, and welcome, Chris Burnett.
I've come from, along with the stargazing theme, I've come from interstellar distances to be with you this morning. Next door at the center. Though sometimes it can seem like a kind of a wormhole into a whole other world. But anyway, it's a delight to be here. I'm Associate Professor at the Center for Visual Arts for the Department of Art at the University of Toledo. So we call this our museum campus. It's really a great way to exchange ideas, and certainly this conference is a welcome opportunity to continue the dialogue. I'm going to, with the title here, I want to point out that most of the images that I'll be showing in notes are online at this address. So if you want to jot that down, you won't have to take a single note, more or less. All be there. It actually, I still have to update it, but by the end of the day, I should get that on. So to start out with, I want to point out the end papers for a book called Geared to the Stars. It's about the history of planetariums as of course a force in astronomy and popular education of that subject. But I like just looking at the end papers divorced from any of the content of the book, just indicating that indeed the book in itself is one of the kind of subtopics I want to bring out. Reading, vehicles for reading are very much also geared to the stars as a more general form of pattern recognition connected to texts, to writing, and a variety of things that I hope to draw out these connections. It was definitely the case even without the planetarium. The human knowledge of the stars and observational skills and understanding the heavens or how the constellations work, sometimes in connection with astrology, of course, then later more and more being connected to the science of astronomy and astrophysics. But a long-held, centuries development of sensitivity and skill and ability to perceive pattern that regulates all kinds of things, of course, in human societies with calendars, schedules, prophecy, and so forth. I wanted to juxtapose these two image 19th century paintings, one of Winslow Homer on the right-hand side, new novel, just to indicate that one can be as engrossed in a book as much as one can be engrossed in perceiving the stars as a source of wonder and so forth. In the title, I kind of shifted that a little bit because I wanted to indicate that something of the connecting link that I hope to draw out between understanding of the stars, constellations, and skills and intelligent viewing and might be a platform. And I want to emphasize that what I'm thinking of the planetarium is of a platform that can bring different media together. Not necessarily a medium in and of itself, but a platform which can bring together a collection of protocols, conventions, technological capabilities that can bring these things together. So we speak of sometimes a game platform or something in that nature. So I'm speaking about it in that general way. It's a little bit ironic that to think of the planetarium as a platform as something normally that's a staging underneath your feet. But then again, the planetarium is very much about looking up in the whole structure of the thing. And that brings me to my first section, having to do with the architecture, the structural, the spatial form of a planetarium, and the possibilities of bringing together basic forms of pattern recognition that we can usefully derive from the long history of constellations, to pattern recognition as a form of meaning-making connected to a long tradition of literacy and texts. Other sections will be looking at sky writing or writing connections, as well as textual patterns, patterns in text, and how we can understand those as a textual form of constellations, essentially. And then I will end up with some thoughts about new possibilities of information visualization and what information architects, information designers are doing, which I think can be illuminated still further with looking at the planetarium as a platform for information architecture. So we've got a long way to go to get there. It might be useful, as I say, to start out with the architecture of constellations in reading. A pair of artists, very well-known artists, Robert Smithson, of course he died in the early 70s, Mel Bachner, the person that collaborated with Smithson in this wonderful, very droll article called The Domain of the Great Bear, of course, Great Bear Constellation. And it's a kind of investigation of the Hayden Planetarium that was published in art form, of all places, in 1966. So this was Bachner being really a proto-conceptual artist at the time, teaming up with Smithson, and looking at the Hayden Planetarium as a kind of a site. In a way, the architecture for them, the architecture of the Hayden Planetarium itself was kind of like a cosmological model, full of all kinds of ironies, where you could see a sign pointing to the solar system one way and the restroom in the other way. You know, so they were kind of very humorously bringing together these paradoxical aspects where you could be confronted with notions of infinity and the Big Bang and cataclysmic aspects of understanding a place in the universe, but in this very, also very mundane architectural framework from which all that was. So in a similar way, I kind of want to explore the architecture of the planetarium itself as a platform for understanding the connections between constellations as pattern recognition and possibilities of advanced reading. The Hayden Planetarium is, especially in the old days, just awesome kind of a building, almost like the sublime of the visionary architect Burnett in 1784. That's the cenotaph for Newton. There's something just about dome structures, large dome structures, that carry a quality of the infinite space. In the case of the image on the right, of course, questions of death and all time. So the architecture itself carries that to a certain degree. We have, of course, at the University of Toledo, the planetarium. And I'll tell you, just last night there was an interesting event called Faux Space, but that will be down the road with some students showing some work there. But immediately what I want to point out is the Ritter exemplifies the position of a planetarium in an academic campus, in the layout, as almost a beacon of knowledge, along with the towers that might exist in a campus. The presence of a planetarium dome kind of is a symbolic form of architecture that goes with the observatory. And in seeing them both like this, and again, I think this is very typical for a lot of planetarium architecture, is that it coexists with an actual observatory. And you kind of see them both together. And it works both ways. I mean, the planetarium, of course, is generally used for popular communication, a visual experience for popular education. But it can also be used as a research platform as well. And it was interesting for me, looking back at the history of planetarium, that there was, when they really started, in the 1930s with the Zeiss projectors, etc., there were only about 5 major planetariums in the United States. The Hayden, Buell Planetarium in Pittsburgh, the Adler in Chicago, and the Griffith in Los Angeles. And the early directors, or people funding and running these concerns, didn't want them to be just seen as solely for eye candy or for educating. Of course, they were very interested in educating children, and that's probably the primary public for these planetarium shows. But they wanted the possibilities of the planetarium to be used as a full-fledged research apparatus to coexist with that to a certain extent. And so I think the symbolic importance of the observatory, clearly a tool for research, coexisting with the dome planetarium, makes that kind of dual purpose kind of come into being. There's a further irony, of course, is that very often, especially an observatory of this nature, it's also used for public education because of light pollution and a number of things. In most campuses, their observatories are probably, not really serious research instruments anymore. They have to go to other facilities around the world, to really function in that way. But again, I kind of was driving, my interest, and I hope your interest too, is that it can work both ways as a way of communicating knowledge as well as kind of a frontier of research. And I have started making kind of humble beginnings with some experimental projects that I just started that's developing custom software for the planetarium as a platform. And the planetarium at the Ritter that I have enjoyed some access to is a Spitz Sidome HD, and it actually projects 2 images, almost like a stereoptic kind of a projection, and then the projector system fuses the 2 images together to make the full dome kind of a thing. So in starting out with my software, I had to develop the image processing or the graphics processing to be a double fold kind of a thing that would be the right distance apart and the right number of offsets and the kind of warping. So I started just with this sort of kind of basic kind of work, and I'll show you a little bit about some advanced steps beyond that. The Ritter Planetarium is currently showing fire fall, and one thing it's a great program, Firefall, the one that is currently in the Friday evening show. But one thing that I find is somewhat limiting about current trends in planetarium features is that they're like canned IMAX films. And they're very much shaped by the discourse and the conventions of film. And I think there could be stronger possibilities of developing the unique capabilities of the planetarium in a real-time kind of performance. And they typically, traditionally used to be very much real-time performances with the control of these fabulous projectors, with a director narrating things in real time. They were not canned to the extent that they are now. So they're really doing, marvelous things with computer graphics and these things, but there is, again, a kind of a canned quality shaped by conventions of film, especially IMAX, widescreen cinema. And there are also structures of narration that are both interesting possibilities as well as some confining aspects to that as well. I really enjoyed when a senior, Sarah Connor, did do a kind of a real-time prologue, to the feature, and she showed the regional skies, so there was that old kind of site-specific quality. Here you are, this is the sky of Toledo, etc. And I had this experience when the system itself kind of rotated the image around like this, just like a turnstile, kind of spun it around. And I actually had a kinesthetic feeling that the whole auditorium was turning around. And I really thought I knew the system. We're talking with Alex Mack and some of the other people after Ritter. I really thought I knew the hardware. I says, oh my God, I didn't know that the auditorium itself could turn around like a turnstile. Because I really had that feeling. So it points out that there still can be surprises in the way that the planetarium as a medium and as a platform can really have a surprising, disorienting, as well as orienting experiences about how we perceive space and the illusions of motions and the content that they're delivering. Just to kind of build on that a little bit, here's probably one of the most famous planetariums in this country, if not the planet, is the Griffith. And typically there's this kind of, in here it's even more dramatic, and then it's almost a hydra-headed combination of the observatories, which when this was built was state-of-the-art stuff. And Hubble, giants in astronomy were based and did their work at the Griffith. But then right in center station was the planetarium. And the benefactor, Griffith, really wanted, again, that double aspect of popular education combined with research to really happen here in this rather exotic Art Deco structure. One of the most famous presences of the planetarium in popular culture in film is The Rebel Without a Cause, that has a scene at the Griffith. And of course, that's a film with James Dean, Natalie Wood, Sal Mineo. It's a real classic American film history. So there's the scene at the Griffith, and it starts out. There's a kind of a banter between the kids. They're making cow sounds when there's a constellation, that kind of thing. But then as the narrative develops, there becomes a kind of a subcurrent of endangerment or threat. And the director is pointing out possibly the cataclysmic evolution of nebula and galaxies. And you can see in the lower left-hand corner, suddenly those kids are just, wow, And I really get a sense from that scene that it's expressing even the existential dread at the period, 1955, just as the Cold War and threats of nuclear annihilation were very much on people's mind, that sense of ominous quality. Where are we, in the universe? And so it's a fantastic scene that is really key for bringing that sense of teenage angst, being lost, trying to find values, that the observatory becomes a kind of a symbolic platform, for expressing that sense. And the histories of panorama, especially as they developed in the 19th century, is also an important pretext. And, the scholars look at these buildings as being some of the founding conventions, what ultimately became film, etc. But they were also very different, more allied to some of these possibilities I'll be discussing about the planetarium than again to film conventions and film history. You can see here that there was a whole set of levels and stairs in this particular London-based panorama building. And somebody like Patrick Geddes in Scotland made conscious use of the fact that people would have to climb up to the top of the Camera Obscura in Edinburgh, and they would hyperventilate, and they would be, kind of dizzy, kind of out of it. And so it was almost like kind of enhancing, the sensual experience that they were about to see. Dome buildings and dome structures, have that quality of trying to communicate in a kind of a more open, sensual channel than other buildings. There is a photographer, David Stevenson, that's done a wonderful series. It's come out with a book called Visions of Heaven, European dome architecture. So there's this rich tradition that's kind of accumulated with Stevenson's photography. And especially when you see them cataloged this way, that you really get the way that this architecture functions in terms of cosmological models, as well as religious belief in the celestial sky. I have, as been mentioned, kind of making baby steps in developing software for the planetarium, and I'm starting out using text in this very geometric way. The one on the left is software that is just made for a full dome projection system, which is just a single image that fully covers the 180 degrees. And the one on the right is for the cyto, which again uses that kind of a double image that's frozen together. These textual arrays, geometric in form, are dynamic. So the kind of like a Times Square, the text runs across, multiple threaded around, and there are also different levels of points around the periphery of that can shift. So again, just the beginning of just using text to define a dome, emphasizing the dome architecture and as well as the text as pattern, as dynamic pattern in it. To kind of draw out a few more ideas about the planetarium as a platform, we can look at World's Fairs, a rich source of projects. And one of the most famous is the Phillips Pavilion at the Brussels World Fair in 1956, I think it was, mid-50s. There's a fantastic book called Space Calculated in Seconds by Mark Treed that analyzes this. And it was a building. The building was designed by Le Corbusier. And there was Xenakis, an avant-garde musician, and visual designers all collaborated in this really fantastic. And it was also one of the first applications of computer controlled systems for these multimedia exhibitions. So even though the architecture itself was more like a tent configuration, it points out many of the possibilities of architecture, sound design, audio-visual design with kind of a sophisticated, very sophisticated interweaving of those elements. Another important work that shaped at least my thinking about the possibilities is the film of Ray Charles Eames called Powers of 10. And the important thing about this, of course, is the structure of scale. Of course, it starts out with a human scale, a couple picnicking on probably a Chicago waterfront park, something like that. And then it goes up 10 scales, starting out 10 meters, 100 meters, etc., just times 10, going out and out and out in structuring. So, of course, architects are like, of course, they were furniture designers, they did all kinds of things in their design practice, but very sensitive to the power of scale, and especially the visuality of scale that informs our sense of what the world is and making meaning, making sense of our surrounding and everything that we know through visualization technologies. I want to go back to David Stevenson again, who directly has used photography to photograph stars and star patterns. He lives in Tasmania, Australia. So none of this is observatory medium. It's just the nighttime sky, but with long exposures and the manipulation of the camera and time to make, again, the sense of the architecture of the dome of the visual field as a aesthetic experience and ultimately a work of art. Another wonderful artist that has inspired me is Sharon Harper. Harper also photographs with a large format camera without aid of a telescope or observatory, and not even going off to someplace where there isn't a great deal of light pollution. She will photograph in the Northeast, New England, or whatever, but is opportunistic to find conditions where she can make these star images. What is unique about her particular image is that she makes multiple exposures, time-lapse photography that connect to her own position, her own life experience, in connection to the constellations that she's representing. Moving apart from the direct representation of stars, I think some artists, like Damien Ortega, use the sense of just an exploding field of things. So things that we might see in an astronomical observatory, using it as a metaphor for our relationship with everyday things, alienating them in a way, making them almost like Big Bang explosions. Other architecture that can carry that sense of constellations, not literal but figurative constellations that are part of the urban environment. And this photographer, McClellan, making these exploded, all giving the sense of even at the level of everyday things, technological forms are understood as a kind of a constant expansion, blowing apart. In ways that the planetarium has come home, even as a subject of childhood education. This is a book from the early 1950s called Pinpoint Planetarium by Armin Spitz. he is very, very important in the whole evolution of a planetarium and as a platform now. Before Armin Spitz, the Zeiss really had, the German company Zeiss, really had the whole market of planetarium projectors, practically a monopoly on that. Very, very expensive. Many directors felt that to be a real serious planetarium, you had to have a Zeiss Model 1 or Model 2 projector. But Spitz really put the lie to all that and developed much, much simpler technologies that could certainly accomplish a lot of the educational goals of the planetarium at a fraction of the price. So Spitz, in addition to making these kind of do-it-yourself books for children, developed technology and installations, and was essentially responsible for now, we have over 400 planetaria in this country alone. Almost every major university, like ours with the Ritter, Kent certainly has a planetarium, any number of campuses now, thanks to the Spitz company. But some artists, like Heidi Nelson, are just interested in those initial attempts to make the planetarium kind of a learning toy for children. In this book was exhibited at a show of artist books up in Cleveland, where I became aware of it. Heidi's now doing a residency in the Yukon, and she also does other projects that have to do with weather monitoring, astronomical observation, etc. But again, she's interested in the kind of do-it-yourself aesthetic applied to observatories and planetaria. But back to this big tradition of the Zeiss, I just want to point your attention to the absolute science fiction aspect of the planetarium projections, especially going back to Zeiss. And Zeiss first came out with their Model 1 in the early 1930s. And again, like something from another planet. I remember the first one I saw was at the Buell Planetarium in Pittsburgh, not too far from where I grew up. And I'll just never forget it. It was, again, just something otherworldly. And that something of that experience that you have over and above the content was shaped by that encounter with something alien that was transporting us like some kind of a time machine or something like that. So this is just a quick flip through the progression of these devices through the years. And of course they would rotate. And these are all mechanical, and through time they have become digital controllers, etc. But the cleverness with the mechanics and how the mechanics can simulate actual star movements and star rising constellations is quite amazing. And of course, it comes from a long tradition of the creation of orreries, planetary models that are mechanically linked. So of course, they reflect the notion that the universe itself operates according to mechanistic principles and laws that can be modeled and simulated with human-made machines. With the color, and the advent of the color seems to get into a more modern time. This is from the 1970s, Stargazer, and more into the present. The Spitz Sidon projector is completely a digital projector. Not, no cogs or wheels in that. that marks another whole chapter in the history, is the complete digital quality of contemporary full dome and Spitz-Sidon type projectors. Now I want to shift a little bit away from architecture through writers and their use of observatories in a way as a platform for literary experiment, literary expression. And one of the key works in that is Prosa del Observatorio by Julia Cortázar. And I'll have several works of his to show. Spanish author, very experimental in his approach, but a combination of poetry and prose forms his work. And this particular work has his own photographs of a observatory from the 1600s in the Jaipur province in India. And it is just like something out of a dream architecture or visionary architecture. But these are actual working observatory systems with no optics involved, but simply using the planes and curves of this structure, of course, to get precise degree calculations on star risings and planetary movements. And they could get, at that time, they could get a degree of precision just through the scale of it. That was very important. But that quality of a precisionistic building machine becomes in a way, a playground for Cortázar to bring a stream of consciousness prose. He has another narrative about eels, water, sky, all kind of interthreaded. So the observatory has a kind of an architecture of suggestion, coexists with the poetic prose and the images that come together. You can see the way that the text is almost blocked and formed in sync, with each of the images. Not too long ago, there has been an English translation by Archipelago publishers. In that, they blow up the pictures from the original Spanish edition. They also kind of make the line space of the prose much larger, so you don't have that much of a sense of the text being a kind of an image block. I don't like the design in that respect as much as the earlier tradition, but I do like the expanded emphasis on these surreal images of this non-optical observatory from the 1600s in India. As a kind of an homage to Cortázar, one of the software projects that I've been working on is a kind of a kaleidoscopic treatment of that text itself and projecting that in the full dome. It really looks pretty amazing when it's projected full 180 degrees. And it's kind of dynamically rotating and shifting with random phrases coming out of the text being projected up on the screen too. Cortázar did another project, a writing project, in the late 60s called The Autonauts of the Cosmos. And even though the actual premise for the writing is that he's driving along a highway in southern France, and he stops at rest stops and just systematically writes for a period of time at each of the rest stops. And then he drives to the next rest stop. And the book is sort of an accumulation of this travel journey. But he looks at the space of the around him as kind of like an alien territory. next section that I want to look at is the possibilities of writing or using or thinking about the planetarium as a platform for writing. And back again to Cortázar, he was the author of Michelangelo Antonioni's masterpiece film of Blow Up. It's a short story that the film is based on. And it's a story about a photographer. It's a fashion photographer who also has an interest in his own art photography. And he's milling around in a park and he photographs a kind of an enigmatic encounter between two individuals, and they just disappear. Later on, the woman reappears, demands that she get the film back out of his hands. That only piques his interest in holding on to it all the more. So what could they possibly be hiding that inadvertently the unconscious optics of the camera is captured? So he investigates the photograph by blowing it up, seeking in the details some solution to this puzzle. And ultimately, through this sequence of investigating the sequence of photographs, going in deeper and deeper into the granularity of the film, he finds what looks like it could be a gun, but is it? Ultimately, any sense that you have in solving this mystery breaks down, and the indeterminacy of a random pattern of the granularity of the film. And as Antonioni brilliantly develops this through these actions of minds, where you're really projecting onto it. So one of the aspects of understanding the constellational aspect as a metaphor of reading is that we're always in a process of projecting pattern. Pattern recognition is a double role of looking at features of the real world in pattern and making sense of that, and very often projecting meaning on that indeterminate field. So Antonio really sets the stage for this investigation of looking at writing and apart from our typical encounter from writing on a page, but sometimes writing as connected to an experience of epiphany. When Rembrandt represented Faust in his epiphany, it's the reading of text that is in a way disembodied from the substance. It becomes an imagistic way of communicating or bringing forward textual meaning. So artists through the centuries really have looked at the interplay of books, more ordinary forms of printing text in connection with optical experiences and configurations of light and image. Probably one of the most famous and commonly used texts for visual literacy from the 1940s was The Language of Vision by Georgi Kepesh. Kepesh was a protege of the Bauhaus artist Moholy Nagy, of course, who came over to after the war to Chicago, founded the new Bauhaus. Kepesh kind of came along with him, and then ultimately moved to MIT in Cambridge, and worked through his entire career at the intersection of art and science, and these very important texts, very influential texts like The Language of Vision, that cause educators to look in a new way of how artists communicate more broadly and how it's more generally part of a literate enterprise. Kepesh had a strong interest as an artist through his entire career in light writing. And many of his works are, quite informed by astronomy most important exhibitions, about a decade later from the language of vision, was the New Landscape in Art and Science. It was an exhibition out of which there was a catalog. And even in his approach to exhibition design, it was very all over. You know, there wasn't pictures hung on a line or a traditional formwork looking at images in a linear or sequential organization. They're all over, and they're multi-scalar. You know, we think of Eames' interest in scale, powers of 10. This exhibition was very much about the new vocabulary of vision that was being opened up by technologies of imaging that operate at many scales, of the macrocosmic, the microcosmic. And much of that exhibition, through its form and structure and content, was a contemplation of that. Kepish was also involved in programming light signboards. And I think you can see in here the almost calligraphic quality of some of the light characters, the almost Starfield-like quality. And he would have been directly interested in some of the source materials of astronomy and other sciences of imaging, and in the development of this art and science projects. This light writing work, of course, it's a long exposure with a light wand or something making a kind of a calligraphic pattern. But even in the title, it's directly connected to at least a metaphor of astronomy, constellations, and starfield gazing, but connected overtly to an act of writing. Artists were, like the photographer Rasai, interested in graffiti. And even though graffiti, almost by definition, is tied to walls as a substrate, or architectural buildings and barricades, etc., the way that they photograph them, the figural forms almost become separated from the wall as a substrate, and they become more constellational. This is an image of Aaron Siskin. It's actually a print that I own. I studied with Aaron Siskin when he was at Rhode Island School of Design. And he gave me this picture, and when I was at his studio picking one out, he asked me what I liked about it. And, you know, I kind of hemmed and hawed. I wasn't sure. He said, don't worry, the picture doesn't care. So, well, but when I got a gumption, I said, well, it kind of looks like a planetary system. And he was kind of interested in that. You know, he was interested in a kind of an open-ended perception of wall markings apart from, you know, its connection to the abstract expression of Franz Klein and other. Also Cy Twombly and these graffiti-like marks that also the sense of a quality of writing. It's a proto-writing that almost seems like failed letters. They're not quite developed as letter forms, but at the same time, they're shapes that are not completely separate from the possibility of there being kind of emergent signs. But very, very, very explicitly in the modernist work of Miro, constellations were very much the point of influence and inspiration for these works. André Breton, the head of the Surrealist movement, wrote about Miro's constellations, and it was really a collaborative process. There was a portfolio that was issued with Miro's constellations and Breton's writing that kind of coexisted with them, a little bit in the way that Cortázar's writing coexists with those images Observatory in India. So there is a kind of double interest in constellations as a proto-form of writing, failed letters, not exactly alphabetic literacy, but in the way that it frees the imagination in the work of the actual writing of Breton that coexists with that. One of the most fascinating artifacts of the invention of photography is this early photogenic drawing of William Henry Fox Talbot from 1835. And he pierced tin and put the tin in connection with paper, like a photogram, and exposed the paper. It's one of the first examples of the photography of writing, or the making of writing, especially an alphabetic sequence. In there, if you can decode it, there is just the litany of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So just running through the possibilities of using photography to transmit lighting. So the fusion of image and text starts with the invention of photography. And it's a suggestive way that the pinpricks, you use pinpricks in the tin that creates, again, this quality of a kind of a star field that mediates the two things, the photography and the alphabet. An even more perplexing artifact in the history of photography, if we can call it that, was of the philosopher August Strindberg. And he made these so-called celestographs, which were chemically induced patterns in metals. And he took them as being kind of like cameraless photographs of the night sky. You can kind of see, a formal quality. And I'll go to it later, as there are students that have this show called Faux Space at the River Planetarium. It's a little bit like that, of making a photographic image of something that might suggest a quality of a night sky. But Strindberg had a very serious philosophical interest in this experiment in representation, and even a mystical quality of that what we were seeing was a kind of a universal pattern, recognizing pattern that in some way or fashion is perceived as being universal. It's the way that the heavens work. A more recent artist with a kind of a philosophical bent is Patricio Guzman in this film, and I highly recommend it. You can get it on Netflix. It's called Nostalgia for the Light. And the filmmaker investigates the kind of parallel situation of the scientific observatories in their work in Chile, in the Atacama deserts near the Andes. It's a remote area of the world that is probably the most well-suited to observation of astronomy in the whole planet. The humidity is practically zero. There's very little, if any, light pollution. So it is the place. Every major scientific, National Science Foundation funds big projects, observation projects in this area of Chile. So it's a remarkable, international enterprise, big science in this very remote area of Chile. On the other hand, Guzman explores people, ordinary people, that are out wandering around in the desert, searching for the remains of their loved ones who have been disappeared during the Pinochet regime years ago. Of course, many people with the political turmoil in Chile under under this dictatorship were disappeared. They were captured, kidnapped, and people simply don't know what happened to them. They might have been dumped out in the ocean, or in some cases, as they think, they were buried out in remote places in these deserts. So Guzman looks at this region as combining this kind of disparate activity. But the wonderful thing is that somehow he draws connections, that there is a common purpose of the astronomers working in that region and the people looking for the remains of their loved ones. They're all essentially involved with trying to recapture the past. In the case of the observatories, they're capturing light that is always, and they're really profound comments of some of the astronomers about even the sound of our own voice as a time delay. We're always involved with trying to make sense of the past. All astronomy is a kind of an archaeo-astronomy. And that brings into a very profound way that the impulse to try to reclaim something of the past happens at many different levels of even with the trauma of that situation and that political situation. For quite another set of purposes, another photographer, Thomas Roof, made these star pictures in the 1990s using that area of Chile in the observation and things. But here, of course, the work is taken out of context and becomes a work of art in a gallery. But nevertheless, another way that region has become important. One artist explicitly using stars as a kind of writing, or connected to kind of a proto-writing, is Sarah Holt. And this is an image of the moon exposed in a rocking sailboat, or so she says. So it would be hard to imagine how the random motions of a sailboat could just come up with the utterance of why. But nevertheless, it's just the bringing forward in a kind of humorous way the enigmatic quality of reading and encountering celestial bodies in the heavens of the night sky. She's even taken these star drawings and made decorative objects out of them, ceramics. And she also works in the medium of light in architectural structures, but all having astronomical meanings. Another brilliant artist is Josiah McElhaney, that makes these almost like horror-like sculptural objects with light, of course, at the tips of them. McElhaney has been collaborating with an astronomer at Ohio State University, this Weiner, and so there's a serious astronomical thought and theory behind this sculptural work. He's also very much interested in the discourse of light in modernism. Some of the early influences of McElhaney was viewing the fabulous chandeliers at the Metropolitan Opera in New York. And I made these, our department went on a field trip at the Stranahan here in Toledo. And these are the chandeliers at the Stranahan. You can almost see, again, some of the design glassworks could have as an informed basis in the modeling of solar systems and orreries and things of the like. And this brings us to our student show at the Ritter. photographs made by students taking a class with Deborah Orloff. Mark, in the over left-hand corner, makes this kind of, looks like it could be a supernova or something like that. And I saw these last night projected at the river. They're really, fabulous projected in that huge 40-foot dome, 360 degrees. Nika on the left made something that really looks like a credible star field and pattern. And Shelley in the bottom, if anyone can guess what that actually is, it's not the surface of Mars or something like that. It's an ash bucket, or the bottom of an ash bucket. I think the one that got out of focus works a little bit better in that respect. And then again, some of my own work in the software that is emerging, working with a particle animation that will project into the field. You can see my image in the background on the right-hand side. So it's a camera image or camera feed that will be projected. And ultimately, what I want to do is create an interactive program where you can take if I can see with my glasses, you can take your cell phones and point it up to the program, and it will read, because there's a camera that will be viewing the audience, and the audience will be projected up on the screen. They can interact with the light, and part of the software will be blob detection. There is software that I don't have to design, from scratch myself. You can get off-the-shelf libraries of blob detection software, so that it can detect the light that people are transmitting, and then use that kind of like a mouse pointer for actually driving the particle animations that are being projected in the planetarium. Part of it, I think what might be an interesting possibility of that is that you begin to see the planetarium as a kind of a mirror, as well as a observation platform. In terms of understanding the nature of literacy, especially with regard to printing and other technologies of literacy, the whole field is rife with at least astronomical metaphors. Certainly beginning with McLuhan's founding text, really, from 1962 on the Gutenberg galaxy. He was thinking of the galaxy, really, in the way that literature informs the whole environment of how the senses work. McLuhan believes strongly that new technologies of literate communication change the ratio of the senses, and changing technologies of literacy continuously redefine the ratio and interaction of the senses. So even though literacy is commonly connected to the printed word or alphabetic form, it shapes how we look at pictures. He says that a literate person looks at a picture almost like the point of vision stops right at the picture plane and takes in the whole thing. Whereas a non-literate, because this is according to McLuhan's theory, would scan the picture, look at it all over. Very different kind of an encounter that occurs, so that all forms of making sense out of pictures, all different kinds of media, have been impacted by the Gutenberg galaxy, or many different shapes of alphabetic literacy. McLuhan was very wanted to take expressions, pull them out of context. There's a wonderful book called Probes that is a collaboration between Marshall McLuhan's son, Eric McLuhan, and the design, especially the wonderful typographic designer, David Carson, that made this book, where McLuhan's aphorisms about literacy in media take form against the kind of sky-like image. And finally, got to see where I am in time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't have time for questions.
Okay. Well, I'll just finish up with a little bit with textual pattern recognition, and back again to hopscotch. And hopscotch is what's the first kind of hypertext, where you have a series of numbers, and that guides how you go through the text. So you don't read it in a typical sequential page-by-page order. You hop around, you hopscotch through it. Significantly, in Cortázar's early title, he's got the ground, the earth, and the sky at the top. So even here, he's kind of thinking of astronomical metaphors for thinking about experimental methods and forms of reading. Now, I'm going to hop ahead here just so I can conclude. Ultimately, in looking at artists who are experimenting with pattern recognition and how we read, especially poetic form, we lead to current possibilities in information, visualization. Mark Lombardi making these kind of galactic images of how the Bush family has been kind of interconnected with oil and money, etc., and commerce in the Middle East. These are hand-drawn, but they become really very influential in new techniques of mapping textual form. One author calls it distant texts. And much of my work is also informed by some of these questions of pattern recognition and textual pattern. But to end, this is phase one of a continued research that I'm doing into the planetarium. And phase two has more to do with the planetarium as a visualization platform for not just for stars, but for information, all kinds of communication. And I've been very influenced by an author. His name is Timothy Wharton, and his recent book is called Hyperobjects, with a philosophy and ecology after the end of the world. He looks at hyperobjects. As an example of a hyperobject is global warming. It's a process that is multidimensional, and we can't apprehend it all at once. We have to see it in time. He views that we could look at data visualization as a way to better understand something as complex and multidimensional as global warming.
Chris, I'm going to have to interrupt and just announce that it is 11:40, 10 minutes until the next session. So just so you want to stay and hear wrapping up, I need to go on out to the next session. So I just wanted to let you know. Thank you.
And Olafur Eliasson is, I think that some of his installations do that, bringing together the planetarium-like images and making that a medium of visualization, something as complex and multidimensional as climate change and global warming. Anyway, thank you so much. And very soon. Maybe there's time for a quick question. I know you have to get off of the thing.
You can stay as long, there's not anything in this room, so you are able to stay as long as you
Well,
want.
if there are any questions, I'd be happy